Hello, my name is Mitchell T. Palmer. You know my name, damn it. And this is Beyond Barbering Live. This is a premiere episode. We've never done this before. And I'm very excited. I'm a little nervous. I'm trying not to do anything wrong because I don't want to embarrass my good friend, longtime client, and general warrior savage, beer brewer, an official beer judge. That over there is Jared Fuller. Jared, do they know your name?
You don't know my name, damn it.
Well,
Not
you
yet.
now. Know his name, damn it. Jared, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. Let's turn up the music and let's get into this.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jared, tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are, some of your past history, anything you think is applicable.
Yeah, so I guess my past, getting me to where I am today, was a long, winding road. Like most people, I assume most people have a very windy road to get to where they are. Mine started in the Navy right out of high school. Got out of the Navy, had a medical condition that they removed me from the Navy for. My career goals at that time was the Navy. So that was my plan. There was no plan B. When I got out of the Navy, it was at the height of the housing crisis, and I couldn't get a job working at McDonald's at the time. So I decided to use that GI Bill and go to school, and failed. And so I went to school again, and then failed. And then I started doing fun things like rafting and kayaking and skiing, and that brought me out to Utah, from upstate New York to Utah. And then that eventually led me to Alaska. And then that led me back to New York and then back to Utah, where I met my wife, and she grounded me.
Okay, so that's New York, Utah,
Alaska,
New York, Utah.
yes,
And you served in the Navy
in Groton, Connecticut.
in Connecticut.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, sorry, I interrupted. You said your wife grounded you.
Yeah, excuse me.
We have no cough button, Jared.
Sorry, just gonna have to deal with it.
It's not radio.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody just watched you cough.
Now,
Do you feel violated?
no, I'm
That's
fine.
good. Because you weren't.
Yeah, so she grounded me as in I met her, love happened, and I decided to stay in Utah indefinitely.
Oh, I see. So she didn't actually ground you, but her presence.
I found my
grounded
grounding here.
you. Okay. Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you two have been together for how long now?
We just celebrated our 7th year together.
That's awesome.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Do you need a little bit of water?
Oh, I think I'm good.
Okay. All right. If you change your mind, you let me know. So that's kind of where you've come from. But as we mentioned in all the promos leading up to this, and of course in my entry into this first ever live Beyond Barbering video, you are now a beer brewer, and you've been doing that for a number of years. You are also a beer judge. So what brought you to the desire to be a beer brewer? What sparked that?
Yeah, so that was just like many people, I think, many people who get into home brewing. It starts off with a buddy getting you your first beer kit. And one of my friends bought me one for my birthday, and it was just this shitty little Mr. Beer kit from Walmart. And made horrible beer. Some of the most atrocious beer I've ever had. But I made beer, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool.
Well, it's from Walmart, right?
Yeah, so, right. So I decided to upgrade, and I started getting real brewing equipment, and started out with some extract stuff. The biggest pain in the butt about brewing, in my opinion, was the bottling part. So I only ever bottled twice. The second time I was like, screw this, I'm going to kegs. Because it's just way easier to fill one container than it is to fill 50. So
That
I
makes a lot of sense.
went to kegging, and then brewing just became so much more enjoyable.
So
Yeah.
what I ask, the difference between we have the shitty little Walmart kit.
Hmm.
What were some of the major upgrades to your kit that you started to add? What
Oh,
differences
just
did that make, or should that be pretty obvious? Walmart retail
yeah.
versus.
I mean, the major upgrade is really getting like a kettle, like a good sturdy kettle to brew in, and then some quality plastic buckets to ferment in, and then the ability to control your fermentation temperature also matters a lot. So that's like the next step. Um, and it just started for me. It started out as just a hobby, and the way that I got to where I am now is this hobby stuck with me from the Navy, through my failed attempts at college, through my travels. Everywhere I went, I was brewing beer. I didn't brew beer in Alaska. I wish I did now because it would have been fun to say that I brewed beer in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. But I did not brew beer there. But it did follow me through my travels. And then when I made my last attempt at college for mechanical engineering at the University of Utah, which, by the way, I failed that one too. It was my third year in, and my wife comes up to me. I'm sitting at my desk, and I've got my hands in my hair and my elbows on the desk, and I'm trying to study linear algebra, physics 2 for engineering, and all this other stuff. And she just comes up to me, puts her hand on my back, and she goes, "You need to quit." And I was like, "What?" She's like, "You are literally pulling your hair out." She's like, "Why don't you try to get a job as a brewer?" I was like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "You love brewing. Why don't you get a job as a brewer?"
Wow, so the impetus of getting a professional first foot in the door was your woman.
Yeah, she's a good one.
So you have these stories about, and these phrases that we have out there about how behind every good man is a good woman, right? Or a better woman, right?
Yeah, true.
In your case, um, absolutely spot on.
Yeah, I'd be bald now if it wasn't thanks to her.
From tearing all the hair out, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you will bear with me, what I'd like to do right now is for the viewers, you and I have watched this already, and I'd like to watch it for a few seconds anyway together. This is probably something probably really recognizable to most of the people out there, especially the men folk
I think
that
so.
might be watching Beyond Barbering Live with Jared Fuller, and that is. It's over now. So, Jared, what we just watched, of course, is a clip from the great movie Sparta, right? The Spartans at the gate, the hoplite soldiers. Did your journey up to getting that first job as a beer brewer, or even in your first moments as a beer brewer, kind of feel like going into battle like this?
Yes and no. Um, there were most of my battle was internal, trying to figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up, if you will. I never really had an answer to that. My answer to that was, oh, the Navy. And it didn't come from anywhere other than myself. I was like, I'm going to be in the Navy for 25 years, and I'm going to retire, and I'm going to have a pension for the rest of my life. And then I'll just figure out what I want to do then. But the battle along the way was trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. And it was that epiphany moment when my wife said, "Why don't you just be a brewer?" And I was like, "Huh, yeah, that'd be a lot easier than mechanical engineering. I mean, that's actual rocket science." And I have a genuine passion for brewing and fermenting, all things fermentable, not just beer. I do wine and mead and vegetables. I don't like mead that much. It's not that tasty, but the vegetables, fermented vegetables, are great. I think it's a great way to go about storing things and preserving things. So, yeah, I do. I think that me getting to this point was a battle internally. It was an internal struggle, and it was sitting right in front of my face the whole time. I just needed somebody to point it out to me.
So, in terms of the actual steps into brewing, what were some of the methods, or what was the approach that maybe didn't work so well that you've learned from? And we'll get into later what you did about that. But what were some of the things, some of the hiccups or obstacles to break into the process of becoming a professional brewer?
Right. Yeah. It's, I thought it was going to be a lot harder than it was. Not to say that it wasn't difficult, but the thing is, there's really every brewery that's out there currently has a brewer, and that brewer is probably either the owner or is so passionate about their work that they don't want to leave. So a brewer position opening up is extremely rare, especially in some of the smaller breweries. My wife suggested to me that I get a job at our local homebrew supply shop, Salt City Brew Supply, right there in Midvale. And I did, and I met two of the greatest bosses I have ever had in my life. Cody and Ross are some of the most chill people I've ever worked for. In fact, they are the only people that I would ever consider working for again, or still, because I still sometimes help out there.
That's Salt City Brew Supply, right?
Yes, they're located in Midvale. And they're a great place to go for if you want to get started in home brewing. Their expertise there is unmatched, in my opinion. Cody and Ross have since started their own brewery.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, they started their brewery downtown Salt Lake called Bewilder Brewing. They're right around 4th and 6th.
I love the name of that.
4th West.
I love the name of that. So what was we've already kind of talked about what the call was that got you started on this journey, but were there any villains?
Yeah, myself. I continue to be my own worst enemy.
How is that?
I have the means necessary to pursue my own brewery at this point. I don't know that I have the balls to jump in and just do it.
Okay. So what happens if you don't do it, or what happens if you do and you don't have success? What happens then?
Well, ultimately, I end up losing myself and family members a relatively large sum of money if it's a failure.
So I have to ask, right, the juxtaposing question, and that is, what do you stand to lose, in your opinion, if you don't, so to speak, go all in and take this jump?
My sanity.
You say, okay. That's a pretty straightforward answer. I don't think. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna. If I don't pursue this dream, I'm always going to have that what if in my head. That what if I was brave and I did take that leap. That'll always bother me for the rest of my life.
And what if you do?
Well, what if I do is yet to be seen, but I would imagine that I'd have some success at least. And I'd like to imagine that it is a success that I might be able to pass on to my future children. And yeah, I don't think that I could stand going through life not trying my hardest and failing or being successful. And
sorry.
and leaving that with my children. Like, I wouldn't be a good role model if I had done that, or if I hadn't made my most valiant effort, right?
So part of your goal or your motivation is to show an example to your children, to leave something behind for them to potentially continue to run in your absence, or
Well, maybe
after
not
you're gone?
physically. Like, that's going to be completely up to them whether or not they want to take that over. Not necessarily leaving something physical behind, because tangible things they come and go. But leaving behind my work ethic and my stick-to-itiveness, my stubbornness, leaving that behind, I think is more important. Those lessons that I can leave to my kids will be way more important and way more valuable.
So in making this transition from college student, Navyman turned college student turned beer brewer, what has what have you already created? What's already come from it? And maybe talk a little bit about the interim period now between why don't you just become a brewer and get a job as a brewer, and the next step, which would be what you're talking about, I guess the hopeful goal that you have, which is to open your own brewery.
Mm-hmm.
What in the middle has happened to create the opportunity that you now are faced with, where you're deciding go all in or continue to brew beer for other places and judge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first biggest step that I made in the right direction was getting the job at Salt City Brew Supply. Even though it didn't pay much, it opened the door to the world of brewers. It's a pretty tight-knit community. It's odd because we like to think of a capitalist market as a market that competes. And while the brewing industry does compete, they also hold each other up a significant amount.
Oh.
They want to see each other succeed.
Sure.
So it's a cool, close-knit market. And once you're in that little club, that little boys club of brewing, or more female brewers are coming up more and more, so we can't necessarily just call it a boys club anymore. But
Old
the
affectation.
the brewers club, if you will, once you're in that little club, everybody's rooting for you. Everybody's cheering for you. They want to know what you want to do. And right away, I played hockey with a guy who happened to be the head brewer of Bohemian. And the very first time I met him, I was like, yo, man, if you guys ever need like a brewer there, or assistant brewer, whatever, could you just keep me in mind? Just let me know. And no shit, 6 years later, I get the phone call. He remembered me throughout that whole time. Of course, we'd been playing hockey together for 6 years anyway. And he saw me grow into Salt City Brew Supply. He saw me get my beer judge certification program. And he saw me, I judged with him on several occasions. And so being in there constantly reminding him, he's like, hey, actually, we just had someone leave if you want to come over. So that's how I got started professionally brewing, through my good friend Brian Erickson.
That's amazing. That's a while ago, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a little over a year and a half, maybe. No, yeah.
So what strategy? Let's see. I want to read this question because it's a little technical.
Sure.
What strategy, or I work with a mentor who talks about frames or framework. What frameworks do you see that you had to develop to get to the desired spot, from tearing their hair out student to actually crafting beers in a professional arrangement?
The framework that I've built has been a social framework, a social network of people that I try to stay close to and close with. Then, yeah, surrounding myself with the right people helps a lot. You surround yourself with people who want to see you succeed, and you will eventually succeed. They tend to point you in the right direction, give you that little extra nudge. I've also built a framework of my own with a business plan. I've taken the time to think a lot of issues that I may come across, think through a lot of building design, think through a lot of how I want to structure my organization. So I've come up with a business plan that I can execute. It's an executable plan.
When we talk about the benefits that you are personally seeing, I also, well, I'm going to ask you to talk about the benefits you've personally seen so far in this adventure you've embarked on. But I also want to see if you can tell me or our viewers what other people have seen in benefit because of your effort to follow this. Can I call it a dream?
Yeah, it's absolutely a
This
dream.
dream and goal of yours. You've benefited how, others have benefited how, because of your efforts to follow your own dream.
I think my wife is happier now that I'm not pulling my hair out and at college all the time. So I've definitely helped her life along a little bit more. Of course, I'll have different reasons to pull my hair out when I own my own business, but they will be of my own creation. So, and she'll be right there with me, pulling my hair out for me as well. So, I like to think that maybe I've made an impact on my previous bosses, my previous coworkers in the brewing industry. I'd like to think that. I've helped other people in their pursuit of fermentation and Zymurgy. So I've tried to introduce my brother-in-laws to it, but they're both a little busy. So
Are they busy or are they heathens?
well, I think they just like to drink my beer.
Oh. So what we have here is a case of the Henny Pennies of beer. Is that right? Well, no, Henny Penny actually did the work, right? Everybody else wouldn't chip in.
I think so.
And weren't they baking bread? They were baking bread, weren't they? Henny Penny wanted to
You'll have
bake
to
a loaf
remind
of
me of the
bread?
story.
It doesn't matter. I've gone way off the beaten path, but I thought the bread connection, maybe there are people out there.
Yes, they
watching.
prefer
can
to eat
tell
the
me.
bread and not make the bread.
Yes, they wanted to eat the bread, but they didn't want to have to do any of the work. They didn't want to gather the seeds. They didn't want to gather the wheat.
Right.
That kind of thing. Anyway, back to Jared. Jared, you're more interesting anyway than Henny Penny or me. So what have you seen that you've achieved so far? And I want, if you can, answer that from both the angle of, obviously you're not tearing your hair out as a student anymore. Obviously you have a happier wife, a happier you, more goal driven towards something you're passionate about. But what achievements have you seen? What have you accomplished, both in your roles working for somebody else's brewery and toward your end goal of having your own brewery?
I'm sorry, what successes?
Yeah. What results have you seen? What accomplishments have you keyed in on? What are the key accomplishments that have been most impressive to you, or maybe even most shocking?
Well, I think that I had a couple of bosses at Salt City Brew Supply, and they were extremely nurturing in my adventure into brewing. And they both were two of the most knowledgeable people I still know about, especially when it comes to ingredients. Cody is one of the biggest grain nerds I've ever met. He gets into the science of it like no other, and turned me on to that as well, like delving deeper than just the surface of the type of ingredient and diving into where that ingredient came from, how it was handled, how did it get to your shop, how did it get to your beer. And there's stories there and they're interesting, but the consumer doesn't need to know those. But it does make me a better brewer. And then working at Bohemian, I worked among some of the most some of the best craftsmen I have ever met.
Very skilled.
Extremely skilled. These guys, and only one of the three of them actually went to official school for brewing. Everybody else is self-taught or, the old apprenticeship sort of style. Yeah, on the job training. And I learned so much just from listening to those guys. And then getting the big brewery experience was huge because I could sit there and go, well, why do we do things this way? Why wouldn't I put this vessel over here? Or why wouldn't I put my grain closer to my hopper? Why am I carrying it all the way across the brewery? Why do I have to walk a city block to bring grain to the place that it's ultimately going to go? So I started thinking about how I would design my brewery based on the things that I would have liked to change at the brewery I was working at. So
for convenience or for efficiency?
Yeah, to make it so I'm not breaking my back lifting bags of grain or breaking my back lifting barrels of wet grain to carry out. Trying to streamline things a little bit. And can you buy a part that fits multiple vessels? Can you buy one part instead of 6 different parts to accomplish the same task? Trying to keep it simple, stupid.
Right. So I do want to ask you a little bit because we haven't talked as much about actual beer, but the purpose of Beyond Barbering is more to talk about personal achievements and personal journeys and the successes that come from it. And you know what? Let's get us both up here so you don't have to just look at my fat head. We can scrutinize Jared at the same time while you scrutinize me. But when it comes to beer judging, if you can talk a little bit briefly, because I want to get into more your likes, your dislikes. Now we're going to go a little bit off page. The
little into the
questions,
weeds.
yeah.
Okay.
And talk a little bit more about the cool stuff like beer and its flavors.
It's my favorite subject.
And its purpose. And I'm going to just let you freeform when we get to that. But first of all, I do want to ask about your current goal. So I want to add this question completely off the cuff, and you'll probably kill me for it.
Nah.
But the question is simple. In or out? Are you opening your own brewery, or what's the plan, Stan?
It's going to happen.
No. Say that one more time. You were on my fat head. Is it?
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen.
It's a matter of time. It's
Cool.
going to happen.
That's amazing. All right. So as promised, now I would like to hear more about beer judging. And I think that seems like a good segue into flavors and the different architectural aspects of building a beer. Can you freeform a little bit, or is that putting you on the spot too much?
Man, you're just going to have to tell me when to stop because I can go into so much detail
Brother,
about beer.
If you can't do this, you have no business being a beer brewer. That comes from an expert barber. So, yeah, please go. I'm going to shut up for a few minutes.
So judging, the beer judge certification program is a great program for literally anyone. You don't really have to know a ton about the beer making process. You have to know some basic fundamentals about beer making. It helps to be a home brewer for sure. But if you can pass a simple online test, you can become a beer judge. And then from there, you have to gain some points and get some actual judging experience. And the more experience you get, the more you'll get your rank. So you'll get provisional if you can pass the test online. I would say that the average person can't pass the test online without doing a little bit of reading. So yeah, you pass that test, you get provisional. You do a couple of, you got to get some points, some beer judging points, and the only way to get that is to actually participate in judging competitions that are sanctioned by the BJCP or the American Home Brewing Association. And once you've got some points under your belt, then you can take the tasting exam, which is where they actually test your schnoz and your taste buds to to see if you are full of it or if you can actually detect off flavors in the beer. And it's really, that's the goal of the program, is really to help brewers become better brewers, help homebrewers become better homebrewers. So
mainly the judging is done. Do big breweries, do official breweries enter into these same competitions, or is it just home brewers?
there are some pro-ams. So, for example, Lagerpalooza, which is sponsored by yes,
I'm
Lagerpalooza.
sorry, Lagerpalooza?
Mm-hmm.
That is freaking awesome.
It's sponsored by Bohemian Brewery and Salt City Brew Supply
That
in
is
collaboration. And it's lagers only. So that one is a pro-am. So if you're a professional brewer or an amateur brewer, you can enter that either way.
That's got to go up on the screen, man. Lagerpalooza, that's badass right
Yeah,
there.
they haven't had it the past couple of years, but
Lagerpalooza right there.
I think they're putting it back up this year.
Lagerpalooza.
Yeah, so that's a fun competition because you, as a homebrewer, you get to compete against professionals, and a lot of times the homebrewers beat the professionals in a lot of cases.
Why is that? TLC?
Maybe
Passion?
it really boils down to, at the end of the day, your level of attention to detail and your brewing techniques. And I think that a professional brewer might tend to get a little worn out in their day-to-day job, and so when they go home, they're not looking to do their job again at home. It didn't change I still brewed every single week at home.
Yeah. At least currently, right?
Yeah, and I know several of my professional brewery friends do still brew at home. So yeah, judging is more about helping the home brewer. So the people that enter these competitions, you want to provide useful feedback, constructive criticism, ways for them to get better.
Sure.
And in order to do that, it does help to have a working knowledge of how beer is made.
So what are you typically, what are you tasting for? What are you smelling for?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of beer do you like? What kind of beers are? I mean, is there a beer out there that's a whole list of questions. I hope you're writing them down.
Yeah.
I don't see you writing.
Got them.
But what kind of beers, is there a beer out there that brewers throw in that it's like a hack, right? A hack job. Like, everybody does this. There's a cheap, easy way to get into these beer competitions.
Yeah.
And you roll your eyes at those guys?
I don't roll my eyes at those guys. I guess I roll my eyes at the style. There's a new style. I don't even know if it has an official section in the BJCP guidelines yet. It's hazy IPA or tropical IPA or milkshake IPA.
That sounds lazy. Is
Well,
the problem there that it's hazy?
It's
and
popular.
It's not supposed to be a complete novice on this.
So, because it has become a style, it is now intentionally supposed to be hazy. That is the appearance that they're going for. And people will go through all sorts of lengths to make it purposefully hazy. I wouldn't say that it's not a difficult beer to brew. It's difficult to do really well and really tastefully. But everybody's doing them. And brewers, that's not the first beer a brewer reaches for typically, a professional brewer.
Sure.
You know what beer I sample at every brewery that I go to? The first one that I go to
This is what I want to know.
is their lightest IP or their lightest lager.
Okay. Why is that?
It's hard to hide defects
Okay.
in a light lager.
And when you talk about defects, what does that mean? What is an example?
Typically an infection. There's all sorts of different things. So we want to infect our beer with one thing and one thing only, and that is yeast.
Okay.
Yeast is a fungi, not a bacteria. I didn't know this until I actually started working professionally in the field. But yeah, yeast is what makes alcohol and CO2. And they make some other byproducts.
Oh, so
but
the outgassing, right? The product of
yeah.
consuming the sugars that you use for. Okay.
So they convert sugars into alcohol and CO2 for the most part. There are some other byproducts in there, which will totally get us into the weeds. But one of the main byproducts that you can detect is diacetyl, which is, it's actually up until several, like maybe the 70s, was the main flavoring component of popcorn butter.
Say the name of the ingredient again.
Diacetyl.
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 That doesn't sound like something I want to see in my popcorn butter.
Well, it tastes exactly like popcorn butter. It's actually, if you put it on your popcorn, you'd probably be like, this is the best popcorn I've ever had.
But it is not popcorn butter.
No,
It
it is. It's a chemical compound that compound that tastes like butter. But if you've ever had a beer that has like a butteriness to it or a slickness on your tongue,
yeah.
that's diacetyl. And typically, in most beers, is unwanted. There are some exceptions. Some English beers, such as an extra special bitter, some levels of diacetyl are appropriate to the style. But that's because those yeasts produce an excessive amount of it. And that's just part of the nature of the business. And again, the reason that I go for a lager is because you can't hide anything in a light, like a Pilsner, a simple Pilsner. There's nothing to hide under. All of the flaws are going to come to the surface. So if you've got a pediococcus infection, which is a really nasty one, or a lactobacillus infection, that's lactobacillus is going to make a sour beer, and a lot of breweries will eventually make a sour beer accidentally, and then just change the labeling to say, "Oh, well, we made a sour beer."
Well, we meant to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally meant to do
That
that.
was on purpose.
Absolutely on purpose. But lactobacillus, Brettanomyces, these are actually, we use them to some degree to make beers sour on purpose, or sour beers.
For flavoring it.
Yeah. Like Flanders Red is an example of an aged sour beer. And then they do, I'm trying to think of like other styles. You know, there's lactic acid is, you ever sucked on a warhead?
Yeah.
It's probably straight
Yeah.
lactic acid.
Bitter, just bitter.
Yeah. Really, really
Bitter,
sour.
Sour, yeah. That's-
It really hits you in like the cheek and like,
in those glands.
yeah, right back here. You're like, oh, that hurts.
Yeah.
That. If you ever had a beer that's like that, that's lactic. It's a sour.
So what would you count as? Maybe I should have a talking head for this question. What would you count as your favorite, or do you have one, or make a list of them if you want? This is what I think everybody wants to know about a professional beer brewer and a beer judge.
Well, my favorite beer of all time is from this little brewery, not so little anymore, in Cooperstown, New York. They actually made all the Game of Thrones beers, and for some reason the name is escaping me right now. Ommegang Brewery, and they make a beer called Three Philosophers, and it's actually a blend of three of their different beers, and it is one of the most complex, beautiful beers I've ever had. It's Belgian style. It's just a wonderful beer. You really only want a small amount of it. I think it's like, it comes in at like 9%. It's a pretty hefty beer. So like just a little bit, but it's so delicious.
Compared to Utah's long famous 3.2, what is it now?
Well, so 3.2 was never actually 3.2%. For some reason, Utah's the only place in the world that decided that, hey, why don't we measure alcohol by weight instead of volume? Yeah, that makes sense. And so that's where 3.2 came in. 3.2 by weight is still actually 4% by volume, which is the way the rest of the world measures alcohol. So when it was 3.2, that was actually like everybody would pick on that. Well, Coors Light, Bud Light, Miller Lite, those are, guess what, 3.2 beers. So the most popular beers in the world were always allowed here in Utah.
And I gotta tell you, man, for the most popular beers in the world, they're not good beers. I mean, are they good beers? Am I a heathen? I just don't know what to taste for because they suck.
Well, you know what? I'll give them this. Credit where credit is due. They're consistent. They are extremely consistent.
But what if
you ever have a
consistency is crappy?
Well, I mean, to each their own, really.
Sorry, no offense.
You know what? I'm not going to lie.
Budweiser,
I occasionally enjoy a delicious PBR when I'm out ice fishing or out camping.
But the hipsters, the hipsters have ruined PBR.
I know, right?
It was a solid beer. Now it's overpriced because it's so in demand.
Well, that's why I started drinking it initially, is because it was cheap.
Drinks that beer when it costs as much as it does now. It's a supply and demand.
Miller High Life. I go for a Miller High Life occasionally.
Yeah.
The champagne of beers, right?
The champagne. I like the extra influence or extra accent aigu on the end of the champagne. That's so where next? When are we going to start seeing Jared, the brewery owner and master? And I did not mute my phone, so there you have it. Rude as it.
Somebody owes me a beer.
Somebody owes me a beer. Yeah, okay, that's fair point.
No, I think
if your phone goes off while you're being
interviewed,
if my phone goes off while you're being interviewed on a live shear, then yes, I owe you a beer. I might have to talk to somebody I know about brewing a beer for me to purchase, so that I can give it to you.
So to answer your question, I'm expecting my first child in May.
Oh, congratulations!
Thank you. So I want to get through that first.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I would like to be able to tell you potentially a year, maybe 2, depending on how the market goes. Right now, trying to find commercial real estate is a nightmare.
Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. What else, if there is anything else? I mean, we did a little free form, but any other offerings you have? I mean, to people who are trying to pursue something new and unusual instead of tearing their hair out through college or serving in the military.
Yeah, so
here's sage advice from Jared Corn.
There's this great quote that I love from The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.
Mm-hmm.
You familiar with it?
Vaguely. I know the title. That doesn't count, does it?
Yeah, well, this quote goes something like this. When you realize your true potential and your path, it appears as though the entire world conspires to create it. The entire world will conspire to make it happen. It's something along those lines. I'm not sure that I have the quote completely correct.
I think that makes sense.
But if you're struggling right now with whatever you're pursuing, maybe take a step back. Take a week. Take a break. And ask yourself, does this feel right? Because if it doesn't feel right, it's probably not. It should feel right. When my wife said, "Hey, why don't you just be a brewer?" the light bulb just went on.
That gives me little goosebumps at the back of my head. But it's true. I think, while I couldn't quote it as well as you did, I have noticed that when you do pursue something that is a little bit more right in your wheelhouse, everything falls into place. And the effort do you find the effort you expel or expend on something you're passionate about doesn't feel as much like effort?
Not at all. It's enjoyable effort.
Well, that's pretty cool. Jared Fuller, my good friend, longtime client of this gentleman barber and beer brewer and official judge. My friend, I'm grateful. It's been kind of nice having you in particular, on my maiden voyage, the premier.
My honor.
We might have gone a little long, but hell, I think it was worth it. I mean, what better subject can you go long on than that of the subject of beer? You had any parting thoughts?
No, I just want to thank you for having me on as your first official guest. I'm
Yeah.
truly honored to be here.
It couldn't have been more fun, and I hope the nerves kind of died off a little bit as we went. Hopefully, I don't seem as nervous as I did. You
Not at all.
didn't seem nervous at all. This was phenomenal. It's like you've done this every Tuesday for the last 10 years. My name is Mitchell T. Palmer. You know my name, damn it. And this has been Beyond Barbering with my friend and special guest, Jared Fuller. Sorry, I'm not looking at the camera. As always, God bless the United States of America, the greatest nation that ever existed on planet Earth. God bless you, and be good. Or, for God's sake, don't get caught.